Have you ever wondered what would make the perfect Resident Evil game? No, seriously. Would it be more closer to the action horror of Resident Evil 4, or would it be closer to Resident Evil 7 with its survival horror? I, today, have sat down and thought about what would make the perfect Resident Evil game, and today I'm going to share it with you. With the hype surrounding Resident Evil 9 Requiem building up, I decided to take that game and imagine what would make it the perfect Resident Evil game. Piece by piece, from the core focus of horror versus action, to the setting, to the characters, to the gameplay systems, and finally, the story itself. By the end, you'll see my full blueprint for the ultimate Resident Evil experience. But of course, I am excited to hear what you think is the perfect Resident Evil game, so remember to comment down below as you watch what you would like. So without further ado, let's get started. Starting off, before we design anything else, we have to figure out the right foundation for this perfect Resident Evil game. Is it going to be an action game, or is it going to lean towards horror a little more? That specific question has defined the entire franchise up until this point. Go back to the originals. Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3. These games weren't about mowing down hordes of enemies. They were about scarcity and fear. Every bullet felt like it mattered. Every corner you turned, you dreaded what might be waiting. You didn't feel like a soldier, you felt like prey. Then came Resident Evil 4 and Capcom flipped the script. Suddenly Leon was taking waves of enemies with roundhouse kicks and explosives. It was, yes, still scary, but its tone shifted. Resident Evil 4 struck a perfect balance. You had the tools to fight back, but you're still under constant pressure. That balance is why so many people call it one of the best games ever made, period. But after that, things got messy. Resident Evil 5 and 6 leaned hard into action. Co-op gunfights, huge explosions, set pieces that felt more like Hollywood blockbusters than survival horror. These games still had their fans, but at that point Resident Evil was barely recognizable as what it used to be. Then Capcom fortunately made a course correction. Resident Evil 7 hit the reset button with a terrifying first-person perspective. It stripped away the excess and trapped you in claustrophobic environments in a first-person camera angle where every creak and shadow mattered. It was pure survival horror again, and everyone loved it. And it didn't stop there. The remakes of Resident Evil 2 and 3 blended that classic survival horror design with modern polish. Resident Evil 2 Remake especially proved how scary this series could still be when done right. Then Village, Resident Evil 8, tried something bold. It started off terrifying, like 7, but gradually leaned more into the spectacle and action-heavy sequences, almost like a hybrid between 4 and 7. So what's the lesson? How are we gonna approach Resident Evil 9? My Resident Evil 9. Both action and horror are integral to Resident Evil's DNA, and that means we have to incorporate both parts. The franchise has proven it can shine in both modes, and in a way, both identities shaped the series into what it is today. But we also learned that too much of one or the other might prevent the game from becoming as good as it can be. So that's why for the perfect Resident Evil game, I don't just want one side, I want both. I wanted to start with extreme survival horror, just like Resident Evil 7, but as the game progresses, the action should naturally escalate until it becomes an action horror experience in the later stages, just like Resident Evil 4. That way, you're always evolving, starting out as vulnerable prey and ending as someone who's barely powerful enough to survive the nightmare. So the first piece of this blueprint is clear. The perfect Resident Evil game embraces its horror roots, but doesn't abandon its action identity. It uses both, letting horror make the action more rewarding, and letting the action feel like the ultimate payoff for surviving Grace Ashcroft's ultimate hell. Alright, now that we've nailed down the balance between horror and action, which is going to be the blueprint for the rest of the video, the next step is figuring out where the perfect Resident Evil game should take place. Because if there's one thing that defines the series almost as much as the monsters, it's the setting. Now, I know that we've seen most of the environments from the trailers already for Resident Evil 9 Requiem. I still think that we also need to expand upon what we've already seen, because I don't think they've shown us everything. So in another history lesson, we go. Think about it. The Spencer Mansion in Resident Evil 1. That single building practically invented survival horror. Every door you opened filled you with dread, especially with that short animation. It was small, claustrophobic, and unforgettable. Resident Evil 2 gave us Raccoon City, and especially its police department, which took that same formula and expanded it into something more intricate and oppressive. The environment itself felt like a puzzle you were trapped inside. Fast forward to Resident Evil 4. The creepy isolated village instantly told you that you were surrounded and cut off from help. Resident Evil 7 later on pulled things back with the Baker House, a suffocating, disgusting environment that reminded everyone why the series worked so well when it kept you trapped. Even Resident Evil 8 Village made its mark with a sprawling gothic town, with each area designed to be its own little nightmare. So what's the next step? How are we going to expand upon what we've already seen in the trailers? I think each area should have its own identity. Just like how we said that parts of the game should be more action heavy or more survival horror heavy, I think each area should have its own separate gameplay section. I think the intro sections, I think either the hotel or the hospital, which we've seen in the trailer, should, as we've seen already, be more survival horror focused. It should be like the Spencer Mansion or the house, Baker House from Resident Evil 7. However, the further we get into the game, especially in the Raccoon City Police Department, in the ruins of Raccoon City, as we've seen in the Resident Evil 9 Requiem trailer, should be also survival horror heavy, but also having hints of action. And I think there's going to be another area that we haven't seen so far. I think this game should explore Umbrella's shadow. I know Umbrella has been destroyed and disbanded ever since Resident Evil 4, but I think the return to Raccoon City after all these years is a perfect way to introduce Umbrella's shadow back into the Resident Evil games, because we haven't seen these guys in a while, and these guys took over the first few games. Umbrella, being a main player, should also introduce new enemies. These areas should be including something that reminds you of the old games, like, I don't know, a new tyrant, or maybe some other enemies that were only present in the Outbreak games, because Resident Evil 9 Requiem is tied back more to the Outbreak and Raccoon City era of Resident Evil. So I think we should see more of that. However, we should also be reminded that these new monstrosities have been left to rot for a long time, and they should reflect that. With all that I'm saying, we gotta remember that I think that the more narrative focused sections should be more slow and survival horror heavy as well, but the more fast paced sections should also be more action heavy. Just keep that in mind for later sections. So, what would the perfect Resident Evil 9 game look like? For me, I would like to start in the hospital, as seen in the trailers. Then I want the game to take us to Raccoon City, then into the decaying hotel where it all started. I think this progression would lead to the best narrative, and would also lead to perfect gameplay sections. Next, we have the characters. Resident Evil lives and dies by its characters. Like, I don't know, have you seen Leon? Because people love that guy. From Joe to Chris in the mansion, to Leon and Claire in Raccoon City, all the way to Ethan Winters fighting for his family, the people in the center of these stories are what make them stick. So for designing the perfect Resident Evil game, the characters need to hit hard. Let's start with the protagonist. We've already seen the protagonist in Resident Evil 9 Requiem, as stated by Capcom themselves. They already revealed Grace Ashcroft. She's an FBI analyst and the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft, the reporter from Resident Evil Outbreak. That's an amazing choice because it grounds her in the franchise's history while still giving us someone new. Grace isn't a super soldier like Chris or Leon. She's smart, resourceful, but vulnerable. That vulnerability is exactly what Resident Evil needs in a lead. You should always feel like you're barely surviving, not blasting through enemies with a rocket launcher. Been there, done that, didn't like it. Her journey starts in the hospital where she's reliving trauma from her mother's death. This is the perfect intro because hospitals are naturally terrifying, and it's honestly used a lot in a lot of horror games. Sterile hallways, flickering lights, yada yada yada. There's the constant sense that someone's watching you, and you got the perfect intro. I know we've all been talking about Leon being in the game, and I honestly think that's gonna happen. From everything I've heard online, I think Leon Kennedy would not only be a great choice for the more action-focused sections of the game, I think bringing him back to where it all started would be an appropriate choice for the game, especially since we're going back to the RPD in Raccoon City. I don't think he should be the lead though, and we already know that's not gonna happen, so I'm kinda thankful for that. I think he should be more of a mentor figure. He's older now, more world-weary, and his presence would immediately raise the stakes. Imagine crossing paths with Leon in the destroyed streets of Raccoon City, hearing him warn Grace about what Umbrella still has lurking beneath the surface. It would be honestly just an amazing way to tie the old generation of heroes to the new, and of course, every Resident Evil game needs a memorable villain. For me, that perfect antagonist would be someone new, someone we haven't seen before, because I don't think bringing back someone we've already killed off or someone obscure would be a great choice. We need someone who has seen a lot, who knows a lot, and has been working behind the scenes for a long time. We need someone powerful. Just like how Mother Miranda was introduced in Resident Evil 8, we need someone like that. We need someone who's been working behind the scenes and also connects to other parts of the story. However, it's not someone we have to reintroduce. I've been hearing a lot of theories online that they're going to reintroduce someone from the older games, but in my perfect scenario, I don't think that happens. I think it's someone we haven't seen before, someone who's also very memorable. Everyone else in the game, all the side characters, could also just be anyone. I don't really care as much. What I care about are the protagonists and the villains. However, there are extra characters kind of that we need to talk about. We need to talk about the enemies. Zombies should absolutely return. Slow, relentless, terrifying in groups, as we all know. But we also need variety. We can't just have the same zombies we had in Resident Evil 2 and 3. I think we should have some of those slow zombies from those older games, more for nostalgia, but we also need other types. Mutated bioweapons that have been lurking in the Umbrella tunnels for a long time, as I stated before, would be perfect for different versions of characters or enemies that we have seen before. Imagine a hunter, but a little different. Imagine some other zombies that have some other interesting gameplay additions. We've seen the main stalker enemy, and I love how this enemy looks, but I think we need more than just one stalker enemy. What about multiple? We've seen Jack Baker in Resident Evil 7, we've seen Mr. X in Resident Evil 2 and Nemesis in Resident Evil 3, but what if we have multiple enemies that are unkillable but are also stalking you throughout each location? That would be a twist, that would be new, and that would be very interesting. We've seen the monster in the hospital, great, cool, but what if we have like a failed experiment of Mr. X in the Raccoon City area who has been mutating for over 2 decades? A character who's only become stronger over the years that he's been underground. Wow, that would be an amazing reference to older games that we've seen remade, but also something more fresh. I don't know, I'm throwing out ideas, but the enemies and the characters make or break games. And if Resident Evil wants to succeed, and if we want to make the perfect Resident Evil 9, we have to have the best versions of these characters. So, let's get on to the next section. Okay, let's talk about gameplay, because this is probably one of the most important aspects of any game, not just a Resident Evil game. So Resident Evil 9 has to get this right. And what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to take certain sections from each Resident Evil game to combine them to make the perfect Resident Evil game. What I think Resident Evil 9 should turn out like. First off, we've already seen the inventory management. It's going to be more akin to Resident Evil 2 and 7. Then we need to talk about gunplay. Although I do love Resident Evil 4 a lot, the remake especially for its weapon choice, I think the perfect weapon system would be that of Resident Evil 2 Remake. I love how those guns feel and sound, and I love the variety you get in there. Add some more, and then boom, we got the perfect Resident Evil game. Then we need to have enemies. I know we talked about it in the earlier section, but we need to really focus on how these enemies are going to act like. Are they going to be like Resident Evil 8, where we have werewolves and like crazy demons that just run around and destroy you? Or are we going to have Resident Evil 2 zombies? I want a mix of both. I think for the action-heavy sections of the game, let's say we play as Leon for a bit, I think we should have something more akin to the Resident Evil 8 werewolves. I think we should have something that is action focused but not too crazy. We don't want to go full Lycan mode here. We want to go and lean more towards the enemies from Resident Evil 8 in like the Dimitrescu castle. Something like that. They're fast, yet they're also zombified, scary, and kind of sluggish. We don't want it to be too crazy, but we don't want it to be too slow. However, for that slow survival horror sections, I think we do need some different enemies. I think we should have a return of the hunters. I think having a different form, like those in Code Veronica, where we have like poison hunters or something has mutated, and have that chase around Grace Ashcroft through the hospital or whatever, I think that would be pretty cool. I think we should also have some zombies here and there. Most of all, for the enemies, I want something new. I want something we haven't seen before. I'm not a game developer, so I can't just create the perfect enemy and the perfect enemy type, but I am going to take some inspiration from games that I know and love. I have already talked about the Stalker enemies, but let's go more in depth. We've seen how the hospital Stalker enemy is going to look like, and how that's going to work. However, what if we had multiple Stalker enemies and each had their own quirk? We've seen already the hospital one, as I mentioned before. What if there's like a tyrant one in the Raccoon City? What if there's something that can run a bit like Nemesis, or has a projectile like Nemesis, or can mutate like Mr. X? Something that has a lot of variety, something that reminds us of the previous games, but also offers something new. What about counters? Are we going to have something like Resident Evil 3 where we have to like turn our joystick around to get rid of the zombie? Or are we going to have something like Resident Evil 2 where we have to put something in the zombies' mouths or stab them in order for them to go away? Or are we going to have something like Resident Evil 4 where we have to parry with our knives? I think that Leon should carry over his combat system from Resident Evil 4, but don't make it as focused. Don't make it as intricate as it was in that game. Maybe take away the knife parry and have it be more akin to like Resident Evil 2, but also give him some roundhouse kicks, give him some of that good stuff, something we know Leon, that's what he's good at. For Grace Ashcroft though, I think she should be more like Resident Evil 7. I think that she should have the block that Ethan does, to really round out that trilogy, and she should also be more vulnerable. I don't think she should do roundhouse kicks. I think she should have more of a counter system from Resident Evil 2 Remake. I think having flashbangs, shoving them into the zombies' mouths or whatever the enemy type is, or even having stuff that can prevent insta-kills, that would be pretty cool. And I think that should make a return in this game. At the end of the day, each character that you play as, because I think there's going to be more than one, should play and feel different. Leon should be more bombastic, while Gray should be more slow and calculated. What about the puzzles? We've seen in Resident Evil 8 and Resident Evil 4 that puzzles really took a step back in those games. I think we need to return to the roots. I think we need to take the puzzles and the difficulty of those puzzles from like original Resident Evil 3 and Resident Evil 1 Remake and put those in this game. We need to have a return to form in this case. Puzzles have been here since the start of the series and really should come back in this game. This game should be difficult, not just combat wise, but also puzzle wise. This takes the game more slowly and allows you to be more immersed in the world. Atmosphere and presentation. If gameplay is the skeleton of Resident Evil, then atmosphere is the flesh that makes it terrifying. You can have puzzles, enemies, and mechanics, but if the atmosphere isn't right, it's not gonna feel like Resident Evil. So let's design it. First, the visual tone. The perfect Resident Evil game should be using the RB engine to push photorealism to its limits, but not in a flashy way. I'm talking about dim lighting, peeling wallpaper, broken chandeliers, water dripping from concrete walls. Every room should tell a story just by how it looks. A decayed hospital room with scattered syringes. A hotel ballroom with chairs overturned as if everyone fled in a hurry. Underground tunnels covered in mold and rust. The environments should ooze history, as if you're walking through a crime scene frozen in time. Then there's lighting. Horror lives in shadows. The perfect Resident Evil should not just use darkness as a mood, but as a weapon. Your flashlight should only reveal so much. Maybe it flickers when enemies are nearby, or maybe the battery runs out at the worst moments, and when the power goes out in the hotel, entire sections plunge into pitch black, forcing you to navigate by sound and memory. I know we've seen how this is going to work in the trailer, but I think it's going to be expanded upon in ways we haven't seen yet. Next, the sound design. Resident Evil has always understood that silence is scarier than noise. In the perfect game, the soundscape should be oppressive. Distant creaks in the floorboards above you, faint moaning through a ventilation shaft, a piano note echoing down a hallway when no one's there. Zombies groaning faintly in the dark so you know they're close, but you can't see them. And then sudden bursts of chaos, a door slamming, an enemy crashing through the glass. All hallmarks of Resident Evil just implemented perfectly into this game. You want to have the game feel scary, and sound is the way to do it. But you know what also needs to be implemented well? Music. Music should be used sparingly, like in Resident Evil 7. When you're exploring, the game should be almost completely silent or just basic noise. But when enemies attack or when the stalker appears, a distorted track should kick in to heighten your panic, like Mr. X's theme. And of course, safe rooms need their own signature music. It's basically a classic and basically a given at this point. Calm, haunting melodies that make you feel just a little more secure, but still uneasy. Finally, let's talk about the camera and presentation. We've already seen that the game is going to be first person and over the shoulder. I think both can work, and both should feel different, and they do from what we see in the trailer. But we haven't seen the combats. I think that the combat and the movement should be more deliberate. I think the combat should have weight, and I feel like everything should have tension. I know that this is a given in Resident Evil, but from what I've seen from like Resident Evil 6 and stuff, it's not always a given. Cutscenes should be very cinematic, but grounded, with as little action movie cheese as possible. Looking at Resident Evil 4 Remake here, we don't need Leon diving through explosions anymore, we need scenes that feel unsettling, mysterious, and dramatic. Especially dramatic. All of these elements, visuals, lighting, sound, and presentation, need to work together to create one thing: immersion. The perfect Resident Evil game isn't just scary because monsters jump out at you, it's scary because the world itself feels alive, hostile, and unpredictable. You're not just playing a game anymore, you're trapped inside a nightmare you can't wake up from. We've built the gameplay, the characters, and the setting. Now, it's time to put it all together into a full story. Here's my blueprint for the perfect Resident Evil narrative. We start with Grace Ashcroft in the hospital. This is going to be a slow burn introduction. Flickering lights, empty patient rooms, the smell of decay in the air. Grace is here chasing the truth about her mother, Alyssa's death, a journalist who once tried to expose Umbrella. The hospital is where she first realizes that Umbrella's shadow isn't gone. Strange figures stalk in the hallways, and the first zombies she encountered. From there, the story expands into the ruins of Raccoon City. It's no longer a thriving city, it's a graveyard. Cracked streets, burned out cars, skyscrapers collapsing in on themselves. Umbrella may have fallen, but their experiments left scars that still fester. Here, Grace encounters survivors, scavengers, and even legacy characters. Imagine crossing paths with Leon S. Kennedy himself, older and more world-weary, warning Grace to turn back before she gets herself killed. This section is all about scope. The hotel is still a mystery, but Raccoon City shows us the scale of what Grace is really up against. Eventually, it all leads her into the game's main hub, an abandoned luxury hotel on the city's edge. This is where this story truly locks in. The hotel feels alive, grand lobbies, decayed ballrooms, flooded kitchens, collapsed service tunnels, and every part of it dripping with history and horror. Grace discovers more survivors here, a hotel worker hiding in the walls, a child who knows shortcuts, and people who may not be trustworthy. Some may try to help her, some don't make it, some may even betray her. The deeper she explores, the more she uncovers the truth. The hotel wasn't just a place of luxury, it was used as a cover-up for Umbrella's final desperate experiments. That's why she was there in the trailer that we saw. Records scattered around through suites and offices reveal that Alyssa, Grace's mother, was murdered here for getting too close to the truth. The story escalates into an all-out fight for survival as the hotel becomes overrun with monsters. Zombies roam freely, grotesque bioweapons crawl out of hidden chambers, and one stalker enemy refuses to let Grace escape. The final act climaxes in the grand ballroom, once a place of elegance, now transformed into an arena of fire and blood. Grace faces the Umbrella scientist behind it all, someone from the past, someone who's been lurking throughout the entire series, someone who unleashes one final bioweapon abomination as the building collapses all around them. In the end, Grace barely escapes, with Leon in the burning hotel, clutching files that prove Umbrella's influence isn't over. She's alive, but her mother's truth weighs heavy. The game closes with Grace stepping out into the ruins of Raccoon City, knowing this nightmare isn't finished, and that she's the one who will have to see it through. This story connects the best of the old with a fresh new take on Resident Evil. This is what I imagine Resident Evil 9 would be in a perfect world. And I remind you once again to put in the comments what you want this new Resident Evil game to be. I want the hype surrounding Resident Evil 9 Requiem to go through the freaking roof. And this video hopefully will help that. Resident Evil has always been about more than just shooting zombies or escaping monsters. At its core, it's about atmosphere, tension, and what happens when ordinary people are thrown into a nightmare. And that's why I love this series, and that's why I wanted to imagine the perfect Resident Evil game. Not just because I want better graphics, bigger bosses, and grand spectacles that are set pieces. It's because Resident Evil is at its best when it reminds us what horror can be. It's the uneasy silence before you open a door. It's the decision to save your last bullet because you don't know what's waiting on the other side. It's the mix of fear and determination that keeps you pushing forward when you'd rather turn back. To me, that's what Resident Evil is, whatever the action or horror is. And that's the energy I want to see carried into the future. Horror that grows into action, characters that feel human and flawed, a world that's terrifying but still worth fighting to survive in. So if nothing else, I hope Capcom remembers that the reason Resident Evil has survived all these years is because it's never just been about killing monsters, it's about making us feel like survivors. Thank you for watching and sharing this little blueprint with me. If you want, like, subscribe, do any of that stuff, but I really want to see what you can write in your own little perfect world for Resident Evil 9 Requiem. If Resident Evil has ever kept you up at night, or made you hold your breath as you stepped into the unknown, then you already know why this series matters. Until next time, stay safe and stay out of the dark.